What if I told you that I just found one of the key points of China's influence operations, how they do it, and how Quora, a question and answer site running out of the US, has become one of China's most influential PSYOPs? When I started digging, it got real weird. You don't want internet threats or viruses or people coming after your identity, right? Of course not. And that's why I'm happy to say that today's video is brought to you by Guardio. Guardio is the first line of defense. It's an awesome extension that you put on your browser and it actually detects threats before they even reach them. These threats can cause harm, like putting viruses on your computer, tracking what you do, and even stealing your identity. How does it work? Well, all you gotta do is add the Guardio browser extension from the Chrome or Edge store. You install it, you get a free security scan, and this is the wow moment. This is when you find out if your computer has already been compromised by these things. After completing the scan, you can continue on to get a 7-day free trial and you can remove those threats and also enable real-time protection. What makes this awesome is that unlike other programs, it stops all of the threats before they can even get on your computer. Their identity monitoring feature is cross-platform, so if you sign up through your mobile, you'll get real-time alerts once your data is breached. Get Guardio now and protect your online browsing and information. Avoid installing malware and falling victim to scams and get real-time alerts when your information could be at risk. One Guardio account covers 5 family members at no extra cost, so that's a great deal. So if you want a clean and secure browsing experience, go to guard.io/Laowinner86. The link's in the description and check out their affordable premium plan for full protection as well. This is crazy. This started probably like 3 years ago. It came up on my radar when I started to see posts about myself and about my friend Serpent ZA, another China-centric YouTuber that often criticizes the Chinese government. These posts were popping up in these bizarre fashions. They would ask straw man questions about, what do Chinese people think of Laowinner86, this channel? Why do Chinese people hate Serpent ZA and Laowinner86? And then it would go on with these bizarrely fantastical stories about us, completely out of context and completely wrong. And these posts would be boosted to the top of Google search results. If this is just some weird hater campaign, it's whatever, but why would these be boosted to the top of search engine optimization if they were just a couple haters? No, in fact, we were the targets of a major China influence campaign coming from the Chinese government. And what China's goal was to co-opt one of the biggest question and answer sites, Quora. Now, if you don't know what Quora is kind of like Yahoo Answers, but for intellectuals. It's supposed to be a place where people with very impressive resumes can answer questions because they're supposed to be experts in their field. What the Chinese government realized was that, just like in the educational institutes, they can insert people or insert opinions that can co-opt the entire narrative. Now, you guys probably know China has one of the worst human rights records in the entire world, but they're simultaneously trying to become the biggest global superpower, so they're trying to wipe that away. There's been a campaign in China called 讲好中国故事, which means tell a China story well. This was a campaign set up by Xi Jinping to kind of infiltrate the Western narrative or narrative around the world that China is in fact a humane and wonderful country that deserves to lead the world. Now, the problem is China blocks its own citizens from using pretty much every website outside of China. Think of it kind of like a North Korean intranet, unless they use a VPN, which is illegal in China. So what they do is they hire bots or entire teams and put billions and billions of dollars into a budget of trying to make China look good and the West look bad and infiltrate entire social media networks abroad. Quora was in fact one of their biggest targets, and the reason is that people can quote intellectuals or people that have a very, very impressive background as an official response. This is supposedly from a retired French journalist. Will the Chinese government back down because of the protests? This is the answer. Interestingly, the policy that claimed that they wanted to fight for this protest was actually released a month ago. And before the protest, the policy was already being implemented. You can claim a victory for those anti-China spies. Before the cowboy shot, the enemy was injured and fell to the ground. Good marksmanship. Quora is quite literally littered with all of this. Look at this one. Tony Tan says, what would China be like today if Deng Xiaoping hadn't crushed the Tiananmen Square demonstration 33 years ago? This is the answer. The demonstration wasn't crushed. It ended peacefully without shedding a drop of blood. What Deng crushed was the U.S. Plan B color revolution that took place 5 kilometers from the square when a group of hooligans paid by the U.S. Embassy started to burn buses filled with people. See how this works? This is upvoted so that if you're young or impressionable or you don't really know about this and you're trying to look it up maybe for a research project or a school project, this is the answer that you see upvoted to the top. Straight up Tiananmen Square massacre denial. Then you start to see familiar names. PSYOP is one that I saw come up many times. This person posted and answered thousands and thousands of times. In this question, it says, is it true that the Chinese Communist Party is losing support amongst the people? If so, why? The answer. If you mean the protests in various cities recently hyped up by Western media, I can tell you that in Beijing, people participating in the protests can get $140. In Chengdu, it's $70. In Wuhan, it's $40. And in Guangzhou, it's poor, $27. We have laughed at Guangzhou for this all day. Look at the voice of democracy and freedom of the U.S. has a price, and the price is $27. He's literally saying that the U.S. went in and started the recent protests against the Chinese government and paid people to do so. So basically, if you're wondering about the protests, you Google it, and this is what comes up. There's entire groups like Chinese Story or China World Leader, which are a conglomerate of all of these kind of people that write about China or answer questions about China. And I started to see things that were a little bit weird and a little bit suspect. A lot of the avatars weren't actually people, or they looked uncanny and a bit weird. What I noticed in the end is that, in fact, they were fake. Not only were they populated with Chinese state media people, like Alex from Xinjiang, by the way, who was tasked with taking down me and my friend Winston in YouTube videos. An actual state employee is one of the most popular people here on Quora answering questions about China. Isn't that ironic? But also just completely fake accounts. Fake accounts that post thousands and thousands of times. Just here, if you look at this video I took, look at this Cade Ellis, an amateur astronomer, an atheist, China supporter, and socialist, posted 3 times within 1 minute, over and over and over again. They directly post state media talking points, and Chinese propaganda. They even repost the shills, the Western shills that work for the Chinese government. I noticed that most of these posts that surrounded China were either things that the Chinese government wanted to nip in the bud and win the narrative over, and also past historical references, things like Tiananmen Square, or the Tibetan issue, or Xinjiang, and things like this. One person in specific I'd like to zero in on. His name was Pete Truman. He's an expat, he's a blogger at dailychinalife.com, and he's massive. This guy is a huge Quora power user. So I went to his blog, Daily China Life, a personal diary. One thing I noticed about his picture is that it's a handsome dude with sunglasses, but that picture is not to be found on his blog. In his blog's About page, it says, I'm Pete, an expat and mostly single dude living in China for the past couple years. This is a satirical blog. I follow a fair use policy. If you find your content on the site and wish to be removed, just let me know. So I go back to his Quora and I have a look. All he does is post Chinese propaganda. He acts as some sort of expat that loves China so much and realizes that China's so safe and the West is so bad in comparison. But there's multiple problems with his speech. There are multiple mistakes, and it almost looks like if bots were writing his material. But then it gets even weirder. I looked up the image source for his Quora image. Remember, this is a power user. And it turns out it's an AliExpress image for sunglasses. This image is to be found all over the internet when trying to buy these cheap sunglasses. You can buy them all over the place. And in fact, this is just some sort of Western model that was used in China to pose for the pictures of the sunglasses. So we can already say this is a fake account, but it gets even more hilarious. State media went on to post about this expat's stories on Quora and how amazing his stories are and how good it is that he's supporting people like Hua Chunying and propelling Chinese media to the front lines to give Westerners a less biased approach when looking at China. When in fact, it looks like, the more you dig, that this account was just made by state media. So what Chinese state media was doing is creating an entire fake Western account, posting propaganda about China, and then writing about it in its own state media outlets. They probably should have covered this up. Funnily enough, if you go on to find out the books that he's so proud about writing on his Quora page, he apparently wrote a book about how to reverse type 2 diabetes naturally, but he left out some of the other books in his repertoire. How to Find a Chinese Girlfriend, A Foreigner's Essential Guide to Mastering the Challenges of Dating, Romance, Sex, Relationship, and Marriage with Insanely Feminine Asian Women. This ghostwriter is a state media bot account that wrote fake books that are downvoted to oblivion and is using an AliExpress photo profile. Quora, what are you doing? You're allowing these accounts to proliferate and change the narrative about China. In China, come on, that's lazy as hell. What are you doing? So this prompted me to try to dig even further. If there are thousands and thousands of these accounts completely changing the narrative on a supposedly intellectual or educational website like Quora, if they're commandeering the entire English-speaking narrative about every single Chinese propaganda talking point, then this must come from somewhere. Actually, you know what sparked that off was Pete Truman's blog. I went through the section where you can supposedly ask him questions. And guess what? One of the people that wrote to Pete was Bai Ziwen, which is from the Guancha Syndicate. That is a Chinese propaganda outlet run by the Chinese military. He reaches out and asks him if he can use his answers from Quora in their articles. And then you realize all of this stuff is manufactured to look like an organic conversation with fake accounts just to be posted across different Chinese propaganda outlets. And then it got real weird. There's a website that was archived. I found this website a couple years ago, and I've been sitting on it trying to figure out how to approach this, but finally, I can say I'm going to approach it. They've pulled this website down, but thank God, Google does still keep things in cache, and you can search text and stuff like that. And what I found was a paper that was published in Chinese media. I'll read you the translated version, but you know what it is? It is a straight-up how-to guide on how to co-opt Quora and change people's minds so that they believe Chinese propaganda talking points. Here's a very summarized version before I go into some details. We are working hard on propaganda, but the truth can't be covered up easily. One reason is the bad image of the Chinese government. To fool foreigners, we need to make full use of these people easily trusted by foreigners. So they're referring to Americans, such as Chinese people abroad, Chinese students abroad, foreigners living in China. So what they're saying is they need to create accounts on Quora masquerading as Chinese people living abroad and students abroad and foreigners living in China because they'll appear more trustworthy. Based on research, foreigners get to know China by traditional media and internet. They don't watch Chinese media because they don't know which Chinese media can be trusted. So this is how to take advantage of Quora. The first point is how to use Quora, an overseas Q&A platform, to improve international communication effects. Our country has always been committed to shaping a positive and good national image, but the current international audiences still have a deep prejudice and misunderstanding of the country, and the effective communication is still not satisfactory. Although ice melting is not a one-day effort, we cannot ignore the impact of the fact that the country's external communication has long been overstated by the official meaning of the effective communication. Therefore, it is necessary to make full use of non-governmental international communication subjects, especially overseas Chinese foreign students, foreigners in China, such as non-governmental forces who are closer to the overseas audience, will dispel the misunderstandings and convey the real China. In addition, according to the survey report by the Bureau of Foreign Languages, the two primary channels for overseas respondents to understand China are still local traditional media and new media. What Chinese media? Combining the above 2 points, the article attempts to analyze the possibility of using Quora, a popular overseas Q&A platform, to borrow a boat to go to the sea to further improve the effectiveness of the country's international communication. And what it goes through is it talks about how to build accounts that people will trust. The more influential respondents who answered China-related questions on Quora mainly included the following categories: overseas students, overseas Chinese, and former foreigners in China. Compared with the government and mainstream media, these individual users are closer to overseas audience and understand their ways of thinking. When answering questions, they often approach from a small angle, telling specific stories about themselves and those around them, and have a higher degree of recognition. This kind of spontaneous and humane folk discourse can complement each other with grand and purposeful official narratives, especially on some sensitive issues in the field of international communication. It can play a role in eliminating misunderstandings and easing contradictions. So what it's using is language saying like, hypothetically, what you could do, or what we've seen work, is that you can pose as being a foreigner in China, and then you can sneak in official propaganda because people will trust you. I put an archive link below in the description so you can actually read through this. But quite literally, it goes on to talk about how to groom propaganda talents, what issues to talk about, like Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, South China Sea, human rights, environmentalism, all this kind of stuff. And they even give guides on what language to use, what type of words to use. For example, individual users have answered such difficult questions in a well-founded and flexible form, and the controversy has been smoothed out through rational and peaceful discussions. The exchanges are in line with the Western philosophy of showing, not telling, which makes it easier to gain recognition and conviction from the international audiences. Respect the law of propagation on Quora's algorithm and shape high-quality answers. An important reason for the strong color of propaganda in our country's external communication is that it's boring and empty, reporting good news but not worrying, and most of the information sources come from the government. To win the trust of overseas audiences, especially Western audiences, it's necessary to achieve a balanced display and use contagious, specific stories to attract and persuade them. But it should be noted that overseas audience is a huge group, and there are also differences between them. Quora users are mostly in the United States and India, so you must pay special attention to it when disseminating and fully consider the cultural differences, reception to psychology and expression habits of the audience in key countries to win their support and understanding. And most Quora users are between 18 and 24 years old, so it is necessary to study the expressions of young people's tendencies. In addition, in order to make the answers have a higher exposure rate, it's necessary to comply with the recommendation mechanism of this platform and strive for answers to be displayed and recommended first. The high-quality answers defined by Quora need to have the following text characteristics: relevant to the topic, easy to understand, clear logic, correct facts, and strong reference. For example, under the question, why do the Chinese still care about the Nanjing massacre? The second-ranked answer was selected 2 pictures of a dialogue between youths of the present and the past, and that were circulated on the internet not long ago. Supplemented by concise text and emphasis, the prominent typography with a news link at the end of Japanese APA's hotel's refusal to remove the right-wing book is highly readable, in line with young people's new media habits and Quora's definition of high-quality answers. So basically, they went through an example of how to coerce people with something that did very well. Now, when I look at it nowadays, I can safely say that pretty much all discourse surrounding China is now state-run propaganda, and I have reason to believe, and I've seen a lot of proof out there, that there are scripting programs that the Chinese government is using to write articles. When you see consecutive articles coming out, article by article from the same user by the minute, you know that they're using different tools. I've seen things on GitHub, and I've seen things around the internet, and I have people that actually reached out saying that they have seen guides on how Chinese scripts are used to game the algorithm on Quora. Why is it that the Chinese government for years, unhindered, has been able to take over an American website that's supposed to be a place for people to share expert opinions on topics? Why is it that the Chinese government can block all of these websites in their own country and then spend billions of dollars to influence American opinions and opinions from people all around the world to make sure that their horrific human rights record gets whitewashed? Why is it that the Chinese government can put out an official how-to guide on how to co-opt an American website and influence young people's opinions about China? How is that allowed to continue? Who's responsible here? Is it governments? Is it people running these websites? Is it people that know that these influence operations are happening and continue to allow them to proliferate? You tell me, because I'm lost here. I don't know if you guys know this, but my friend and I, the Serpent Zedai, we actually traveled around all of China. I mean, I lived in China for 10 plus years, but we traveled around China on hand-built motorcycles. We traveled 5,000 kilometers through the south of China and 10,000 kilometers through the north of China. Our aim was to go without Chinese government minders, to show people the real China, to meet the real people of China, and to show you the places in China that were never seen before. We did that with great effort and great trials and tribulations. We ran into a host of problems, but we had a fantastic time, and we are very proud to tell you that we're offering the entire series, the Conquering China series, as a Conquering China box set. If you go to vimeo.com/on-demand Conquering China box set. You're going to get all of it for only $10.99. All of it's available for download, but also, most importantly, is even if you've already seen it, you're going to get a special unreleased behind the scenes special. It's over an hour of footage, an hour of stuff that originally we couldn't even show because of some serious censorship issues that we were dealing with. There's all kinds of hidden behind the scenes stuff. There's analysis from both Winston and I. So I highly implore you guys to go check it out. It's a great gift for anyone. It's a limited time only. It's only going to be this price for a hot minute. So definitely go check it out. Support the channel. And I promise you, you're going to enjoy the show.